The storm outside howled like a wounded animal pressing against the grand windows of the ballroom. Snowflakes whirled madly under the golden glow of lanterns strung above the churchyard. Inside, laughter and music swelled. Champagne glasses clinked, and the polished dance floor gleamed under spinning lights. But in the farthest corner of the room, away from the laughter and away from the warmth of familiar company, sat a man who didn't belong. Martin Greaves, a singledad veteran, adjusted the sleeve of his old navy blue suit jacket. It was a size too big on him, borrowed from a friend, and though he had polished his boots until they shone, he still felt out of place among the silks and sequins. He shifted uneasily in his chair, his broad shoulders hunched, as if the whole room were pressing in on him. Across the table sat nothing, just an empty chair. His gaze lingered on it longer than he realized. To everyone else, it was simply an unused seat. To Martin, it was a reminder of what had been taken from him. His late wife, gone too soon, should have been here beside him. In another life, she would have laughed at his awkward attempts to dance, nudged him toward the buffet, reminded him to smile. Instead, her absence gnawed at him with each burst of laughter that wasn't hers. He clenched his jaw and looked down at his calloused hands. Hands that had carried rifles, patched tents in the desert, and later held his daughter through nights of fever. Hands that now gripped the edge of a coffee cup he had no intention of drinking. Around him, guests leaned close across tables, whispering secrets, sharing stories, basking in the glow of belonging. No one noticed the soldier at the edge of the room, until she did. A hush fell over a cluster of guests as the doors swung open again. A tall woman entered, brushing snow from the shoulders of her midnight blue coat. She carried herself with a kind of quiet command that turned heads as naturally as a flame draws eyes in darkness. The CEO. Everyone in town knew her powerful, untouchable, admired from afar. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she moved through the crowd. Martin expected her to take her place among the important guests near the head table. Instead, she veered left. Her eyes, sharp, searching, found him. Martin blinked, startled. Surely she wasn't heading his way. Yet within seconds, she was there, standing by the empty chair close enough for him to smell the faint trace of winter air clinging to her coat. She leaned down just enough for her words to be carried only to him. "Pretend you're with me." The whisper struck harder than any battlefield order. For a moment, Martin thought he'd misheard, but her eyes held his steadily, daring him to move, daring him to breathe. And before he could speak, before he could protest, she slid gracefully into the empty chair, his empty chair, and placed her hand lightly over his. Her touch was warm against the coldness of his skin. The ballroom blurred. Music kept playing, laughter rang out. But for Martin, time slowed. His heart pounded against his chest like the engines of the transport planes he used to ride. The chair wasn't empty anymore. He wasn't invisible anymore. And the question burned in his mind. Where, why me, why now? If this moment gripped you, imagine what lies ahead. What happens when a lonely veteran and a powerful CEO are drawn together in a snowstorm of chance, kindness, and second chances? Stay with me, because this journey is just beginning, and I promise it will touch your heart. The storm raged louder outside, rattling the stained glass windows, but Martin no longer noticed. For the first time in years, he felt the stirrings of something he thought he had buried with his grief. Hope. He looked at her again, the woman who had whispered salvation into his solitude. Her eyes glimmered with something unspoken. A secret, a plea. Or perhaps, like him, she simply couldn't stand to see that empty chair any longer. Whatever it was, Martin knew one thing: his life had just changed. And there was no going back. For a long moment, Martin sat, frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The music soared around them, strings swelling in celebration of a union that wasn't his. Yet his entire world had narrowed to the woman seated beside him. Her presence filled the empty chair, filled the hollow inside him that had grown larger with every passing year. The CEO, her name he remembered belatedly, was Claire Whitmore, looked utterly composed, as if she had rehearsed this scene 1,000 times. But there was something softer in her eyes tonight, a glimmer of weariness, perhaps, or longing. Whatever it was, it had drawn her toward him, rather than the glittering crowd that seemed to orbit her every move. "Pretend you're with me," she had whispered. The words lingered in Martin's ears, impossible to dismiss. Pretend, as though it were the simplest request in the world, as though he could step into her story like a soldier slipping into formation. But Martin wasn't a man who pretended. His whole life had been built on truth, sometimes harsh, sometimes bitter, but always real. And yet here he was, sitting with her hand resting lightly on his own, her gaze holding him captive. He swallowed hard, leaning slightly closer, careful that his voice carried no further than her ear. Why, Claire's lips curved into a faint smile, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was fragile, tinged with something he couldn't name. "Because everyone here expects me to be unshakable, to glide through the night like I own it. But sometimes..." She exhaled softly, her eyes flicking toward the dance floor, where couples spun in practiced joy. "Sometimes, even the strongest people don't want to be alone." Her confession, barely audible over the music, stunned him. He had come expecting nothing more than to survive another evening of polite small talk and reminders of everything he'd lost. Now, a woman who commanded boardrooms and stockholders was admitting to the same ache that gnawed at him: loneliness. Martin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his instincts pulling him in two directions, toward retreat and toward her. He glanced at the people nearby. Already whispers were beginning, the curious glances of guests who wondered what a decorated veteran was doing beside one of the most powerful women in the state. He hated the spotlight. He hated being the subject of gossip. But when Claire's fingers pressed more firmly against his, grounding him, something steadied in his chest. "You picked the wrong man if you want to impress them," he muttered. "I didn't pick you for them," she replied simply. The words disarmed him more than any argument could. He found himself searching her face, looking for a hint of deception, some sign that this was a game. But her eyes, gray with flecks of silver, held no guile, only truth. The band shifted to a slower tune. A singer's voice, low and soulful, carried over the crowd. Claire tilted her head toward the dance floor. "Dance with me." Martin nearly laughed. The very idea was absurd. He hadn't danced since his wedding day years ago. His boots had been made for marching, not gliding. His body knew drills, not waltzes. And yet something in her tone wasn't a command, but an invitation. He hesitated too long, and she took matters into her own hands. Rising gracefully, she tugged at his hand until he stood. A ripple of curiosity moved through the guests as Claire Whitmore, untouchable CEO, led the weathered veteran onto the floor. Martin's throat tightened. He could already imagine the headlines, the gossip that would spread. But when Claire turned to face him, placing one hand on his shoulder and the other in his palm, the rest of the world faded into insignificance. "Just follow my lead," she whispered again. The first steps were awkward. His shoes caught against the polished floor, his grip too stiff. He muttered an apology, but she only smiled, adjusting her movements until they found a rhythm together. Slowly, tentatively, the dance began to flow. Around them, couples twirled with practiced elegance, but eyes kept straying to the pair at the center, one of society's brightest stars, and a soldier with tired eyes. And perhaps Martin thought there was something beautiful in their imperfection. Claire leaned in her cheek close to his. You see, not so terrible. He huffed a quiet laugh. You're carrying me. That's what partners do. The words hit him harder than they should have. Partners. It had been years since he'd thought of himself as part of a pair, since he'd let anyone shoulder even the smallest weight with him. His late wife had carried so much more than he ever admitted, and when she was gone, he'd vowed to carry everything alone. But here in the middle of a ballroom, he had no business standing in. Claire Whitmore was reminding him what it felt like to share the weight. For the length of the song, Martin allowed himself the luxury of pretending the empty chair had never existed, pretending his heart wasn't bruised and battered, pretending he was a man who could still belong. When the music faded, applause rippled politely across the room. Martin stepped back, ready to retreat to his corner, but Claire's hand lingered on his arm. Her expression was unreadable, caught between relief and something softer. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me not be alone tonight." Her honesty left him without an answer. He nodded, awkward but sincere, and together they walked back toward their table. The whispers of the crowd trailed behind them like snowflakes, drifting in their wake. Martin sat down, his mind a storm of contradictions. He should have felt embarrassed, exposed. Instead, a warmth pulsed through him, foreign and unsettling. For the first time in years, the empty chair no longer haunted him. It had been filled, if only for a song. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know why she had chosen him of all people. But as the storm raged outside, Martin felt something stir in his chest, an ember he thought had long since gone cold. Hope. The storm outside thickened, pressing snow hard against the tall windows of the ballroom. Flakes swirled like restless spirits, eager to peer in at the celebration they could never join. Inside, heat and laughter clashed with the winter's chill, filling the room with the glow of merriment. And yet to Martin Greaves, it felt as if the night had already reached its peak. He had danced. The memory lingered like an echo in his bones, her hand on his shoulder, her whisper guiding his uncertain steps, the warmth of her presence dissolving years of isolation. For a man who had spent nights in foxholes under gunfire, who had endured the silence of widowhood, that dance had been nothing short of a miracle. But miracles are often fleeting. Martin returned to his seat, ready to vanish again into the corner shadows. He told himself it had been enough, a single song, a borrowed moment of warmth. Claire Whitmore, CEO Untouchable, had already given him more than he deserved. Yet the universe, it seemed, wasn't done. The band struck up a lively tune, violins quick and bright. Couples leapt to the floor skirts, spinning laughter rising like champagne bubbles. A group of onlookers clapped in rhythm, coaxing more guests to join. The room swelled with joy, an atmosphere Martin had nearly forgotten existed. And then, amid the music, a voice called out, "Claire." A tall man in an immaculate suit cut through the crowd. His jaw was sharp, his smile practiced, his eyes gleaming with calculation. Martin had seen his kind before, officers who thought charm could carry them through battlemen, who never learned that life was fought in trenches, not parlors. "Care to join me?" the man asked, extending a hand to Claire. The air tightened. Claire's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly, but her smile remained fixed. Martin recognized the kind of smile soldiers wore when orders made no sense, yet demanded obedience. Before she could answer, the man pressed again, louder this time. One dance for old time's sake. Martin's gut twisted. Something in the man's tone grated, possessive, entitled. He braced for Claire to acquiesce, to slip away with a polite nod. But then, astonishingly, her fingers slid back to rest on Martin's hand. "I'm already taken," she said, her voice steady. The man's smile faltered. Eyes darted to Martin as if finally acknowledging him. A ripple of surprise moved through nearby guests. Whispers bloomed like frost spreading across glass. Martin's instincts screamed at him to retreat. He didn't belong in this theater of power plays. But Claire's grip tightened, anchoring him in place. With deliberate calm, she rose. In fact, she continued, her eyes fixed on Martin. We were just about to dance again. The room seemed to hush. The tall man withdrew, his smirk thin, but the damage had been done. All eyes now watched as Claire led Martin back to the floor. Claire Martin began, panic prickling. "Trust me," she murmured. The band launched into another song, slower this time, rich with yearning. Claire placed his hand at her waist, her own resting lightly at his shoulder. Martin's breath caught. Around them, the crowd's curiosity burned, but the moment belonged to them alone. "Why me?" he whispered, unable to stop the question. Her eyes softened, though her smile held. "Because you don't want anything from me." Martin swallowed hard. The truth of it stung. He had nothing left to want. No fortune, no ambition beyond raising his daughter right. Perhaps that was why she had chosen him. The music swelled. They moved not perfectly, not gracefully, but with a sincerity that silenced the whispers. Martin's steps steadied, guided by her patience. His heart, long numb, began to stir. For a fleeting moment, the ballroom faded. The chandeliers dimmed. The guests, blurred, the whispers, dissolved. There was only her hand in his, the rhythm of the music, and the startling realization that he wasn't invisible. When the song ended, applause rippled again, this time warmer, more genuine. Martin released her hand reluctantly, already missing the tether it had given him. Claire leaned close, her voice low, almost lost in the swell of voices. "You carried yourself well, soldier." He shook his head, a dry chuckle escaping. "I thought you carried me." Her smile deepened. "Maybe we carried each other." The words lodged deep in his chest, echoing louder than the storm outside. He hadn't realized until now how much he craved that partnership balance, the chance to be more than the man who sat alone beside an empty chair. As they returned to the table, Martin noticed something unexpected. The whispers hadn't vanished, but they had changed. The glances that once dismissed him now lingered with curiosity, even respect. He was no longer the outsider soldier haunting the corner of the ballroom. He was the man the CEO had chosen, however fleetingly, to stand beside her. For Martin Greaves, it was an unexpected dance indeed. And deep down, he wondered if it was only the first. By the time the wedding toasts ended and the band played its final triumphant chords, the storm outside had grown fiercer. Snow slapped against the tall windows with a relentless rhythm, and every gust of wind howled like a warning. Guests began to gather their coats and furs, murmuring about the drive ahead. The valet line stretched long headlights dimly piercing the curtain of white beyond the grand doors. Martin pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped into the vestibule, uneasy about the road that awaited him. He'd weathered storms before, both in deserts and mountains far from home, but somehow, civilian storms always unnerved him more. He wasn't marching with comrades this time. He was just a father trying to make it back to his daughter. Martin. The sound of his name startled him. He turned to see Claire Whitmore at his side, her elegant coat draped across her shoulders, fine snow still clinging to the dark fabric. Few people dared to call him by his first name. Fewer still said it with the kind of familiarity she managed, as though she had always known him. "You're driving in this?" she asked, tilting her head toward the raging snow. He nodded. "I've handled worse." Her eyes flickered with doubt, then with something firmer. "Let me take you. My driver knows these roads." Martin almost laughed. The very idea of being chauffeured by a CEO's private car felt absurd. Men like him weren't supposed to ride in the backseat of luxury. But when he thought of the icy highways, the steep back roads leading to his modest house on the edge of town, and the daughter waiting for him there, Practicality won over pride. "All right," he said gruffly. Minutes later, he found himself sliding into the warmth of a black sedan, the leather seats smelling faintly of cedar. The driver, a man in his 50s, with weathered hands on the wheel, nodded politely. Martin shifted uncomfortably his boots, scuffing against the carpeted floor mats. He wasn't used to this kind of comfort, and every inch of him screamed that he didn't belong. Claire settled beside him, her posture relaxed, but her eyes distant, gazing at the snow-streaked window. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then softly she spoke. "You were staring at that empty chair all night." The observation cut sharper than he expected. Martin's throat tightened. "Old habits." She turned, studying him. "Habits don't look that painful." He drew in a breath, steadying himself. He hadn't spoken of his wife to anyone outside his daughter in years. But maybe it was the storm. Maybe the unexpected kindness of this woman who had reached for him when no one else had. "She used to sit beside me," he said quietly. "Every wedding, every dinner. She made me feel like I belonged even when I didn't." When she passed, his voice faltered, but he pressed on. The chair just became a reminder. Claire didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, she let it sit between them, her gaze softening not with pity, but with understanding. Finally, she said, "Loneliness has a way of finding the strongest people, doesn't it?" Martin glanced at her. Her words carried weight as though born from her own battles. "You talk like you know." Her laugh was brief, humorless. "Power doesn't make you less lonely, Martin. Sometimes it makes you more. Everyone wants something: your time, your influence, your decisions. But almost no one wants you." The car hummed along the snowy road, tires crunching through slush. Outside, the storm blurred the world into white, a cocoon of silence. Inside, Martin felt an unexpected kinship forming, like two soldiers sharing watch in the dead of night. "Strange," he muttered, two people in a crowd full of laughter, both wishing for the same thing. "What's that?" she asked. To not feel invisible. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, a fragile bond, forged not in power or circumstance, but in simple human ache. The driver slowed as they reached a winding stretch of country road. Snowdrifts piled high on either side, narrowing the path. For a tense moment, the car wobbled tires, skidding slightly before regaining grip. Claire's hand instinctively brushed against Martin's arm, steadying herself. He caught the gesture, small but telling. "Not used to storms." She shook her head. "I'm used to boardroom storms. They don't threaten to throw you off the road." Martin smiled faintly, the first real smile of the night. Different kind of survival. The car pressed on headlights, carving a fragile path through the blizzard. Martin leaned back, his thoughts returning to his daughter, safe at home under blankets. He wondered what she would think of this night, of the powerful woman sitting quietly beside him. He wondered if she would see what he was beginning to feel, that sometimes kindness arrives not with fanfare, but with a whisper in the dark. As they neared his street, Claire broke the silence. "Thank you, Martin." He frowned. "For what? I didn't do anything." She looked at him steadily. "You reminded me I'm still human." Her words settled deep inside him, as heavy as the storm outside, but warmer than any fire. The car slowed to a stop in front of his modest house, its roof hunched beneath layers of snow. A dim porch light glowed, the only beacon against the darkness. Martin hesitated, before stepping out his hand, lingering on the door handle. He turned back to her, his voice low. "You should come inside, at least until the road clears a bit." Claire studied him for a beat too long, then nodded. "All right." And with that, the night of whispers and unexpected dances carried itself into something new. Two lonely souls walking together into the storm's heart, not knowing that a child's smile and a cup of cocoa would change everything. The front door creaked open, and a rush of warm air met the storm's bite. Martin stepped inside, first stamping snow from his boots, then held the door for Claire. She hesitated briefly, brushing flakes from her coat before crossing the threshold. The house was small, with walls painted a soft cream that had faded in places. The furniture was simple, worn but clean. A fire crackled low in the hearth, its glow reaching across the room like an embrace. Despite its modesty, the place radiated a quiet dignity, the kind of home built with steady hands and honest work. "Sorry, it's not much," Martin muttered, his voice gruff as he slipped out of his jacket. Claire's eyes moved gently over the room, the framed photograph of a young woman on the mantel, a folded American flag in a shadow box, and on the coffee table, a child's drawing of a stick-figure family beneath a bright sun. She smiled softly. "It's more than enough." Before Martin could reply, small footsteps padded down the hallway. "Daddy." A little girl appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes with one tiny fist, her other arm wrapped around a worn teddy bear. She was no more than 6, her hair a tangle of soft curls, her pajamas patterned with stars. Her gaze brightened as soon as she saw him. "You're home!" she exclaimed, running into his arms. Martin crouched low, scooping her up with ease. His entire demeanor shifted the weight in his shoulders, lifting as he pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Hey, Bug, I told you I'd be back." The girl leaned back, blinking at Claire, who stood awkwardly near the door. "Who's that?" Martin cleared his throat. "This is Miss Whitmore. She gave me a ride home." The storm was too rough. Claire knelt slightly, her smile warm but cautious. "Hello. You must be Lily." The girl's eyes widened. "You know my name?" Martin chuckled. "I might have mentioned it once or twice." Claire extended a hand. "It's very nice to meet you, Lily." Instead of shaking, Lily tilted her head, studying her with the blunt honesty only children possess. "You're pretty, like the ladies in Daddy's movies." Heat rose to Martin's cheeks. "Lily!" But Claire laughed softly, genuine and unguarded. "That's very sweet of you." Lily wriggled from her father's arms and darted toward the kitchen. "I can make hot cocoa. Daddy always lets me when it's snowing." Martin started to protest, but Claire laid a hand on his arm. "Let her." Minutes later, Lily returned with 3 mugs on a tray, cocoa spilling slightly over the rims. She set it proudly on the coffee table. "One for you, one for Daddy, and one for me." Claire accepted the mug, carefully touched by the gesture. The steam curled upward, filling the room with the scent of chocolate and sugar. She took a cautious sip, wincing as it burned her tongue, but smiling anyway. "This is delicious." Lily beamed. "Daddy taught me." Martin watched them, something tightening in his chest. He hadn't realized how starved he was for moments like this, simple, ordinary, but shared. His daughter laughing with a stranger who seemed suddenly not so strange. His home filled with more than just silence and memory. As they drank, Lily peppered Claire with questions. "Do you live in a castle? Do you have a dog? Do you like snow?" Claire answered each with patience, her laughter growing freer with each exchange. For once, she wasn't the CEO delivering sound bites to reporters or managing boardroom negotiations. She was simply a woman sharing cocoa with a child. When Lily finally grew sleepy again, Martin carried her to bed, tucking her in with gentle precision. She whispered through a yawn, "Daddy, I like her." His throat tightened. "I'm glad, Bug. Now go to sleep." Back in the living room, Claire stood by the fire, gazing at the photo on the mantel. It was of Martin's late wife, her smile radiant, her arm looped around a younger Martin in uniform. Claire didn't speak, but the softness in her eyes said everything: respect, sympathy, understanding. Martin joined her, his hands shoved in his pockets. She passed when Lily was 2. Cancer. Fast and cruel. "I'm sorry," Claire said quietly. He nodded, the silence stretching between them. Then, almost in a whisper, he added, "I never wanted Lily to grow up thinking her father was broken. But some days..." He trailed off, unable to finish. Claire turned her voice steady. "She doesn't see broken. She sees love. That's what matters." Her words struck him with a weight he hadn't expected. For years he had measured himself by what he lacked, what had been taken. But hearing it reframed through her eyes, he realized his daughter saw only the man who came home, who made cocoa, who tucked her in. The fire popped, casting sparks upward. For the first time in a long while, Martin felt warmth, not just on his skin, but in the hollow places of his heart. Claire finished her cocoa and set the mug down. "Thank you for letting me in tonight." Martin managed a faint smile. "I should be thanking you for filling an empty chair." Their eyes met, and for a moment the storm outside seemed to quiet, as though the world itself was pausing to let them breathe. The daughter's smile had done what no ballroom dance could. It had drawn them closer, not as a CEO and a soldier, but as two people discovering that kindness, small, ordinary, miraculous, was enough to keep the cold at bay. The storm lingered well into the next day. Snow draped the town in thick white silence, muffling the usual sounds of cars and chatter. Martin rose early, as he always did, shoveling a path from the porch, while his breath steamed in the air. The work was slow, the kind that pulled at the muscles of his back, but he welcomed the strain. It kept his mind steady. Inside, Claire sipped coffee in the kitchen. She had stayed the night on the couch, wrapped in a blanket Lily insisted she use, and though she looked slightly out of place in his humble home, she carried herself as if she belonged. When Martin returned, stamping snow from his boots, she set her mug down. "Martin, your roof is sagging under all that snow. You should clear it before it gives way," he grunted. "I'll get to it. Been meaning to for a while." "You can't put it off any longer," she said firmly. "If it collapses, you'll lose more than just shingles." He met her gaze, bristling at the tone commanding almost like a superior officer. Then he saw it wasn't arrogance, but concern. Her eyes weren't on the house. They were on Lily, sitting cross-legged on the floor, drawing with crayons. "I'll handle it," Martin said more gently. But Claire shook her head. Not alone. Later that morning, Martin found himself climbing onto the roof with a snow rake, while Claire and Lily stood below watching. He hadn't expected her to roll up her sleeves, but soon she was handing him tools, steadying the ladder, even brushing snow from the porch. Her hair fell loose from its perfect style, her coat dusted white, but she didn't seem to care. "You don't have to do this," Martin called down, his voice carrying over the crunch of snow. "I want to," she answered simply. Hours passed, the three of them working together. Martin cleared the roof, Claire shoveled paths, and Lily gathered snow into lopsided forts. When they finally stopped, cheeks flushed and hands numb, laughter bubbled unexpectedly from all of them. The house, once burdened under layers of ice, now stood straighter, prouder, as if grateful for their care. Inside, Martin lit the fireplace, and Claire helped Lily peel off wet mittens. She moved with surprising ease, her tailored life stripped away in favor of something simpler. Watching her kneel on his rug, brushing Lily's hair from her forehead, Martin felt a pang in his chest. He had told himself not to let her presence mean more than it was a passing kindness, an unusual night. But already she was stitching herself into the fabric of his life. Later, as Lily napped upstairs, Martin found Claire standing by the window, gazing out at the snow-covered yard. "You didn't have to help," he said quietly. She turned, her expression thoughtful. "Do you know what people think of me, Martin? They think I live above them, untouchable, like I've never had to lift a finger. And maybe I let them believe it. But truth is, I miss this doing something real. Something that matters right in front of me. He frowned. You run companies that employ thousands. That matters. Her smile was faint, tinged with weariness. It matters on paper. But it doesn't tuck a child in at night. It doesn't clear a roof so a family can stay warm. She looked down at her hands, reddened from the cold. It doesn't feel like kindness. Her words lodged deep in Martin's chest. He thought of the soldiers he'd known, men who had medals pinned to their uniforms, but still longed to be remembered for the small things, sharing rations, carrying a wounded friend, offering a smile in the darkest hour. Maybe Claire, for all her success, was searching for the same truth. He cleared his throat. You've done more kindness here in a day than some people manage in a lifetime. Her eyes met his, steady and searching. So have you. You just don't see it. The fire cracked, filling the silence. Martin shifted uncomfortably, unused to praise. But something in her tone left no room for dismissal. That evening, when Lily woke and bounded into the living room, Claire was already there, waiting with a plate of warm biscuits she had found in the cupboard and baked under Martin's uncertain guidance. Lily's eyes widened with delight. You made these. Claire laughed. I tried. Your dad was the real expert. The little girl bit into one crumbs, scattering, and her grin spread wide. They taste like home. Martin's chest tightened again. His daughter's joy had been rare since her mother's passing, and here she was, giggling with a woman who had appeared in their lives like a gust of wind through a storm. That night, after Lily was tucked in once more, Martin walked Claire to the couch where she'd sleep. He lingered unsure of the right words. Finally, he said, I don't know why you're here, Claire, why you stayed. But thank you for everything. She smiled softly, adjusting the blanket over her lap. Kindness doesn't need a reason, Martin. Sometimes it just needs a place to land. He stood there, the firelight flickering across her face, and for the first time in years, Martin felt his house wasn't just a shelter from the cold. It was a home again. The storm finally broke 2 days later. Snowdrifts still lined the streets, piled as high as the porch rails, but the sky had cleared to a pale blue. Sunlight glinted off the ice, scattering diamonds across rooftops and frozen trees. For the first time in days, people emerged from their homes, bundled in scarves and boots, eager to reclaim the rhythms of small-town life. Martin drove into town with Claire and Lily. The truck rattled over salted streets, its bed still carrying a snow shovel and an old army blanket. Claire sat in the passenger seat, her posture poised, but relaxed, her hair tucked neatly under a knit cap that Lily had insisted she borrow. The cap was too small for her, and a lock of hair curled out, rebelliously softening her usual immaculate image. Martin caught himself glancing at her more than once. Each time he forced his eyes back to the road, silently scolding himself. Whatever bond was forming between them, it was fragile, temporary. Soon enough, she'd return to her skyscrapers and meetings, leaving behind nothing but echoes. Still, it was hard to ignore the way Lily leaned forward from the back seat, chatting with Claire, as though they'd known each other forever. Do you like pancakes? Daddy makes the best ones. Can you come for breakfast tomorrow? Please. Claire chuckled, her breath fogging the glass. I think I'd be honored. Martin shook his head, half smiling despite himself. You're going to spoil her. She deserves it, Claire said simply. They parked near Main Street, where townsfolk gathered to clear sidewalks and reopen shops. As Martin helped Lily out of the truck, he noticed the stairs. Conversations, hushed glances, darted, and soon whispers floated through the icy air. Is that Claire Whitmore, with Martin Greaves, the veteran? She's been staying at his house, you know. Martin felt his neck flush hot beneath his scarf. He wasn't a man who cared for gossip, But in a small town, rumors spread like wildfire, fast and merciless. His instinct was to shield Lily to turn back before the murmurings grew louder. But Claire stepped forward with calm composure. Her chin lifted, her expression serene. She greeted neighbors politely, even stopping to help an elderly woman load groceries into her trunk. The whispers didn't stop, but they softened under the weight of her kindness. At the diner, where Martin often grabbed coffee, the stares were sharper. The owner, a wiry man named Frank, raised his brows as they entered. "Well, look who's brought royalty." Martin stiffened, but Claire only smiled. "Hardly royalty, Frank. Just here for a hot meal." Frank chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag. "Can't remember the last time we saw someone like you in here. Must be a special occasion." Martin bristled at the implication, but Claire touched his arm lightly, steadying him. "Every meal's special if the company's good," she replied. Frank blinked, caught off guard, then let out a low whistle. "Guess you found yourself some good company, Greaves." The comment drew more eyes, more murmurs. Martin's jaw tightened. He wanted to disappear to take Claire and Lily and retreat back into the safety of his quiet home. But then Lily tugged at his sleeve, her face bright. "Daddy, can we sit by the window? I want to watch the snow sparkle." Her innocence cut through the tension. He nodded, guiding her to a booth. Claire slid in beside Lily, and soon the girl was showing her drawings on a napkin, chattering happily. Watching them, Martin felt something shift. For once, the whispers didn't matter. Still later that afternoon, as they walked back to the truck, a pair of townsfolk stopped him. One was a man Martin had served with years ago, now older and softer around the middle. "Martin folks are talking," the man said quietly. "A CEO like her staying at your place, it's unusual. People are wondering what's going on." Martin's grip tightened on the truck keys. Nothing they need to wonder about. But before he could say more, Claire spoke. Her voice was calm, but firm. "What's going on is kindness. A storm kept us together, and sometimes that's all it takes for people to find a little common ground." The man looked embarrassed, muttered something about meaning no harm, and shuffled away. In the truck, Martin exhaled slowly, frustration written across his face. "You didn't have to defend me." Claire turned to him, her eyes steady. "I wasn't defending you. I was defending us. There's a difference. The word hung in the cab us." Martin gripped the steering wheel tighter, his heart thudding. He wanted to tell her not to say that word, not to give him ideas of something that couldn't last. But he couldn't bring himself to stop her either. Back at the house, Lily raced inside to fetch her teddy bear, leaving Martin and Claire standing in the fading light. Snow crunched under their boots, the air crisp and still. "You know they'll keep talking," Martin said at last. Claire's expression softened. "Let them. They've always talked about me, Martin. At least this time they're not wrong." His breath caught 1,000 words crowding his throat, but none escaping. He wanted to ask what she meant to demand clarity. Instead, he simply nodded, letting the silence settle between them. Inside, Lily's laughter carried down the hall light, and untroubled. For her sake, and maybe for his own, Martin decided the whispers of the town didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in years, his home wasn't empty. The weather turned again without warning. By late afternoon, gray clouds rolled across the horizon like an invading army. The wind sharpened, whipping loose snow into the air, and by nightfall, another blizzard bore down on the town with relentless force. Martin stood at the window of his living room, watching as the world disappeared behind a curtain of white. The storm seemed stronger than the last, a wall of snow and wind, rattling the glass panes. He'd lived through worse in combat, but something about being responsible for more than just himself made the danger heavier. Lily was asleep upstairs, and Claire sat by the fire reading quietly, the golden light painting her face in warm tones. From the outside, it might have looked peaceful. Inside Martin's chest, however, a storm of a different kind raged. He told himself he should be grateful. Grateful for the company, for the unexpected warmth of laughter in his home, for the way Claire seemed to breathe life back into places that had grown stale with silence. But gratitude mixed with unease, and unease hardened into doubt. What was he doing, letting her stay here? Letting Lily grow attached. Claire Whitmore was a woman of wealth and power, her life measured in board meetings and balance sheets. He was a widowed soldier with a modest home and a child who depended on him for everything. Their worlds weren't meant to cross. Martin rubbed a hand across his face. He had fought battles with bullets and fire, but this battle with his own heart was one he wasn't sure he could win. Martin, her voice broke into his thoughts. He turned to find Claire setting her book aside, studying him with quiet concern. "You've been standing there for nearly an hour." He forced a smile. "Just keeping watch. Old habits die hard." She rose, crossing the room with unhurried grace. Her footsteps were soft on the rug, but her presence filled the space like a tide. She stopped beside him at the window, her eyes following the swirl of snow. "It's fierce," she murmured, "almost beautiful in its way." Martin huffed. "Beautiful until it traps you, until you can't see a way forward." Claire tilted her head, sensing the weight behind his words. "That doesn't sound like you're talking about weather." Silence stretched between them, heavy and unyielding. Martin swallowed his throat tight. "I don't know why you're here, Claire, why you've stayed this long, but you don't belong in this life, this house, this town, with me." Her eyes flickered not with hurt, but with something steadier. "And who gets to decide where I belong, Martin, you?" He looked away, jaw clenched. "I'm just being realistic. People like me, we don't end up with people like you." Claire didn't move, didn't flinch. "Do you think kindness cares about balance sheets? Do you think loneliness checks resumes before it moves in?" "You and I aren't so different, Martin. We both know what it's like to lose, to carry burdens no one else sees." Her words cut through him, sharp and undeniable. He wanted to believe her, but fear coiled tight inside. He had survived. War, survived. Grief, survived raising a child alone. What if this, whatever this was, fell apart? Could he survive that too? As if sensing his turmoil, Claire placed a hand lightly on his arm. "You don't have to keep the whole world on your shoulders, Martin. Sometimes, it's all right to let someone stand beside you." He met her gaze then, and for a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to quiet, the wind falling into rhythm with the thud of his heart. Yet still, the doubts whispered louder than the gale. "You should get some rest," he said, finally pulling away. "It'll be a long day tomorrow." Claire studied him a moment longer, her expression unreadable, then nodded. "Good night, Martin." When she disappeared down the hallway, Martin returned to the window. Snow plastered itself against the glass, relentless, suffocating. In its fury, he saw his own fears, mirrored fears of not being enough, of losing again, of giving hope only to have it torn away. Upstairs, Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly. The sound steadied him. Whatever else happened, she was his anchor. He couldn't afford to drift, not now, not ever. But as he finally pulled away from the storm-lit window, one thought refused to let go. What if Claire was right? What if even in the fiercest blizzard it was possible to share the weight? The storm stretched into the next morning, though its fury had softened to a steady curtain of white. The world outside lay hushed and buried, as if time itself had been wrapped in snow. Inside the house glowed with firelight, and the faint smell of pancakes drifted from the kitchen where Martin worked over the stove. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug, her teddy bear perched beside her. Claire had joined her, brushing Lily's curls while they chatted softly. The domesticity of the scene struck Martin with a pang so sharp he had to pause. It was the kind of morning he thought he'd lost forever, ordinary, gentle whole. Yet even as he flipped pancakes, doubt gnawed at him. He remembered the words he had spoken by the window the night before, pushing Claire away. He told himself it was for the best, but as he listened to Lily's laughter, he wondered if he was sabotaging the very thing his daughter needed most. After breakfast, Lily wandered into the hallway chasing after her teddy when it tipped over. Martin and Claire lingered at the table sipping coffee. Their conversation was light, careful, as though both were circling the storm within them. Then Lily's voice rang out. "Daddy, look what I found!" Martin rose, frowning, and followed her. She stood near a small cabinet at the end of the hall, holding a yellowed envelope in her hands. The cabinet's drawer hung slightly open, disturbed by her teddy's fall. Martin's chest tightened the instant he saw the envelope. His name was written across it in familiar handwriting. Soft loops, careful strokes. His late wife's handwriting. He froze. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. "Can I open it?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity. His throat closed. For years he had tucked that letter away, unable to face it, unable to hear her voice, in words she had left behind. He had promised himself he would read it someday when the ache wasn't so raw. That day had never come. Now Lily held it in her small hands, looking at him with trust. "Daddy," his voice was hoarse when he answered. "Let's read it together." They sat on the couch, Lily curled against his side, Claire quiet in the chair across from them. Martin's fingers trembled as he broke the seal. The paper crackled softly, fragile with age. He unfolded it, slowly, bracing himself. The words spilled onto the page in his wife's voice. "My dearest Martin, if you're reading this, then I couldn't stay. I hate leaving you and Lily, but I need you to know something. You are stronger than you believe. I've seen you carry burdens no one else could, and I know you'll carry this too. But please promise me one thing: you won't carry it alone forever. Someday, someone will come along. Let them in. Let them love you. It won't erase me, Martin. It will honor me, because you'll be whole again, and Lily deserves to see her father whole. Never forget, love is not a single chapter. It's a story that keeps being written. Always yours, Sarah." Martin's vision blurred. His chest ached with a mixture of grief and release, as though the letter had cracked open something long sealed. Lily reached up, touching his cheek with her small hand. "Daddy, Mommy wanted you to be happy." He pulled her close, pressing his lips to her hair, unable to speak. Across from him, Claire sat still, her eyes shining with quiet empathy. She had said nothing, but her presence was steady, grounding him as the weight of his wife's final words settled into his heart. When at last he found his voice, it was barely a whisper. "I thought keeping everyone out was the way to survive." But she knew better. Claire leaned forward, her voice gentle. "She loved you enough to want you to keep living." Martin nodded, the truth of it burning through him. He had spent years clutching grief like armor, but in doing so, he had denied, not just himself, but Lily, the chance to see what hope looked like. He folded the letter carefully, pressing it to his chest. Then he met Claire's gaze, something unspoken passing between them. For the first time, he allowed the possibility, dangerous, terrifying but real, that maybe Sarah's words were a blessing, not a burden. Later, as Lily dozed in his lap, Martin sat by the fire with Claire. The storm outside had begun to ease, flakes drifting more gently now. He stared into the flames, then said quietly, "Last night, I told you we didn't belong together. I think I was wrong." Claire's breath caught, but she said nothing, only reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his. The doubt still lingered, whispering like wind against the glass, but the letter had planted something stronger. A seed of permission. A second chance. For the first time in years, Martin believed it might be possible to write a new chapter. The storm had finally eased. By late afternoon, the world outside was transformed, still draped in white, but calm. Now the snow falling in lazy spirals rather than furious waves. The silence that followed was almost holy, as though the earth itself had paused to breathe. Martin stood at the door, pulling on his heavy coat. He glanced over his shoulder at Claire, who sat by the fire, her face lit in soft gold. Lily was upstairs, napping her teddy tucked under one arm. For the first time in what felt like years, the house was quiet. "I need to check the yard," Martin said, his voice casual, though the truth was more complicated. He needed air. He needed space to think. Claire looked up. "Mind if I join you?" He hesitated only a moment. "Sure." They stepped outside together, boots crunching in the snow. The air was sharp, clean, filled with the scent of pine and frost. The sun had dipped low, painting the horizon in streaks of rose and silver. For a while they walked in silence. The snow lay thick along the fence line, bending the branches of the old oak tree in the yard. Martin shoved his hands deep into his coat pockets, his mind replaying the words of Sarah's letter. He could almost hear her voice urging him forward, telling him to live. Finally, Claire spoke. "She loved you very much." Martin looked at her, startled. The way she wrote, Claire continued softly. "The way she thought of you, of Lily. I don't think many people are given that kind of love." Martin's throat tightened. "I didn't deserve it." "Of course you did." Her voice was firm now. "You still do." They stopped near the edge of the property where the snow piled high against the old wooden fence. Claire turned to face him, her breath rising in pale clouds. "Martin, I know you think we come from different worlds, and maybe we do. But grief doesn't care about bank accounts, and loneliness doesn't respect titles. We're both just people trying to find our way." He studied her, the frost in her hair, the flush on her cheeks. She looked nothing like the untouchable CEO he had seen in newspapers. She looked human. And maybe that was what unnerved him most, how easily she fit here in the quiet spaces he thought were his alone. "I'm afraid," he admitted, finally. "Afraid of giving Lily hope for something that won't last. Afraid of letting someone in and losing them again." Claire's expression softened. "Fear is honest, Martin. But it can't be the only voice you listen to." The wind shifted, carrying a faint creak from the trees. They stood there, two figures in the snow, their shadows stretching long in the fading light. Martin's chest rose and fell, his breath heavy. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he reached out. His hand brushed against hers. Her fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. She laced them with his, steady and sure. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was deeper than words, filled with something fragile, yet unshakable. When he finally did speak, his voice was rough. "I don't know what this is, Claire. I don't know where it goes." She squeezed his hand. "It doesn't have to be everything right now. It just has to be real." They walked back together, hand in hand, the snow crunching rhythmically beneath them. Martin felt the weight in his chest ease, replaced by something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Hope, tentative, but alive. Back at the porch, Claire paused, looking out over the white expanse. "It's beautiful, isn't it? The way the world looks after a storm." Martin nodded slowly. Clean. New. He thought of Sarah's letter again, of the promise she had asked of him. Love is not a single chapter. It's a story that keeps being written. Standing there with Claire, her hand still in his, he realized he was ready to turn the page. Inside, Lily stirred upstairs, her sleepy voice calling for her father. Martin glanced at Claire, and for the first time he didn't feel torn between past and present. He felt steady. They walked back into the warmth together, leaving behind 2 sets of footprints trailing side by side across the snow. The following week unfolded in a strange rhythm Martin had never known before. Claire lingered in town, her presence weaving itself into the quiet patterns of his and Lily's lives. Breakfasts turned into laughter over spilled syrup evenings, became long talks by the fire, and even ordinary chores carried a sense of lightness when she was near. But peace has a way of drawing shadows. It began with whispers this time, louder, sharper than before. A headline appeared in a regional paper: Whitmore CEO retreats to small town amid rumors of scandal. The article offered no facts, only speculation. A grainy photo of Claire helping Lily build a snowman accompanied the text, framed to look like something it wasn't. Martin saw the paper at the diner one morning, his stomach sinking as he read the words. He folded it quickly, hoping Claire wouldn't see. But by afternoon, she held the same issue in her hands. "They'll say anything to sell papers," she muttered, setting it down with steady control. Yet Martin noticed the way her fingers tightened on the edge of the table, her knuckles pale. "Claire," he began. "I've dealt with worse," she cut in. "Competitors, tabloids, shareholders looking for blood. This isn't new." But Martin heard the strain under her calm. Wasn't the first time she had been targeted, but this time was different. This time they were dragging him and Lily into it. That night, as he tucked Lily into bed, Martin's doubts returned, gnawing like wolves. Was he selfish for letting Claire stay, for letting Lily grow close to her? What if the media frenzy worsened? What if his little girl became collateral damage in a battle she had no part in? Downstairs, Claire sat by the fire, her phone buzzing on the table beside her. He could see messages lighting up the screen names of board members, news outlets, people demanding answers. She ignored them all, her gaze fixed on the flames. Martin took a seat across from her, his voice low. "This thing between us, it's bringing you trouble." She looked up, her eyes clear despite the fatigue. "Martin, my life has been public for years. Trouble is part of the territory. Not this kind of trouble," he pressed. "They're twisting things, using Lily's picture. My name. That's not fair to her." Claire studied him for a long moment. "Are you saying you want me to leave?" The question cut deeper than he expected. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I'm saying I don't want to see you hurt. Or her." Her lips curved into something halfway between a smile and a frown. "You think you're protecting us by pushing me away, but all you're really doing is protecting your fear." He stiffened. "Fear, yes," she said softly. "Fear that this could be real. Fear that you might lose again. Fear that maybe you deserve to be happy." Her words struck like a bullet finding its mark. He wanted to argue, but the truth of it stole his breath. For years he had carried grief like armor. Now, facing the possibility of love again, he was terrified. The silence stretched. Finally, Martin spoke, his voice rough. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." Claire leaned forward, her eyes unwavering. "Martin's strength isn't shutting people out. It's letting them in even when it scares you. Especially when it scares you." The fire popped, sending sparks upward. Her words hung in the air, heavy with challenge and promise. Later that night, when the house had gone still, Martin lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the windows. He thought of Sarah's letter of her plea that he not carry life alone forever. He thought of Lily's smile when Claire laughed with her. He thought of the storm outside, and the warmth inside, and the truth settled in his chest like a stone. Claire was right. He was afraid, but fear, he realized, was not a reason to let go. The next morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, Martin found Claire on the porch, sipping coffee and staring at the snow-laden trees. He stepped beside her, his breath clouding in the cold. "They'll keep talking," he said. I know. They'll try to tear this down. She turned, meeting his gaze. Then we build stronger. For a long moment, neither spoke. The world was quiet, just the crunch of snow falling from the branches above. Then, with a resolve he hadn't felt in years, Martin reached for her hand. Whatever comes, he said, we face it together. Her fingers tightened around his, and for the first time since the headlines, she smiled, not the polished smile of a CEO, but the unguarded smile of a woman who had found something worth fighting for. And Martin, soldier that he was, knew he had just chosen his next battle. The days that followed carried a strange tension. The gossip hadn't stopped, it had only grown louder. Some whispered that Claire was hiding from a scandal. Others claimed Martin was chasing something far beyond his reach. Everywhere they went, eyes followed, questions lingered. But then the storm came. It struck with a suddenness that even the seasoned townsfolk hadn't expected. Snow fell heavy for 2 days straight, burying cars, blocking roads, trapping families inside their homes. Power lines buckled under the weight, and darkness spread across the town. Martin had lived through worse, but as he checked the old radio for updates, he knew many of his neighbors weren't prepared. Some were elderly, some had young children. And in the silence after the storm, a truth settled over him, like frost. This was his fight. Not on foreign soil this time, but here in his own backyard. Claire stood by the window watching snow whip across the street. What can we do? Martin met her gaze. We help. Within an hour, Martin had pulled on his old army parka and boots, his snow shovel slung across his back like a rifle. Claire bundled up too, her fine coat dusted with powder, as she followed him into the storm. Lily stayed home with a trusted neighbor, her eyes shining with pride, as she watched her father and Claire step out into the blizzard. They went house by house. Martin shoveled paths, dug out buried doors, and chopped wood for fires. Claire carried groceries, blankets, anything she could manage. At first, neighbors looked surprised to see her the CEO who usually appeared in headlines rather than snowdrifts. But surprise melted into gratitude as she knelt to check on an elderly widow as she handed hot tea to shivering children. By the second day, the whispers of gossip had shifted. They weren't about scandal anymore. They were about kindness. Did you see Claire Whitmore hauling firewood? She was out in the storm with Martin all night. They didn't have to, but they did. The turning point came when Martin and Claire reached the home of Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, an older couple stranded on the far edge of town. Their roof had nearly collapsed under the weight of snow, and their generator had died hours earlier. The house was freezing their health, failing. Martin moved quickly, his training taking over. He reinforced the roof with planks scavenged from the shed, while Claire wrapped the Callahans in blankets, speaking to them with gentle calm. When Martin returned inside, covered in sweat, despite the cold, he found Claire kneeling by Mrs. Callahan, coaxing her to sip broth warmed on a camp stove. She's stable now, Claire said quietly. They'll make it through. Martin watched her for a long moment, awe rising in his chest. This wasn't the CEO the world talked about, the untouchable figure of wealth and power. This was a woman who had chosen to stand knee-deep in snow, her hands raw and red, because she refused to let strangers suffer alone. By the third day, the storm eased, and the town emerged, battered but intact. Power was restored, roads cleared. Yet something fundamental had changed. The people who had once whispered suspicion now spoke openly of gratitude. At the diner, Frank, the owner, shook Martin's hand, then Claire's. "You two saved this town," he said simply. Claire shook her head. "We just did what anyone should do." But Martin saw the truth in their eyes the town would not forget. That evening back at his home, Martin built a fire, while Claire sat nearby, her hair damp from melted snow. Lily bounced excitedly on the couch, recounting to her teddy bear how Daddy and Miss Claire rescued everyone. Martin watched them both, his chest tight with something deeper than pride. This wasn't just survival. This was community. This was love in action. When Lily finally drifted to sleep, Martin turned to Claire. The room was quiet but alive with warmth. "You didn't have to stay out there," he said. "But you did. You fought beside me." Her smile was tired but radiant. "You taught me that kindness isn't about what you have, it's about what you give. And Martin, you've been giving all along." He swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing into him. For years, he had felt like a man living half a life, his best chapters already behind him. But tonight, with Claire's hand resting over his, he felt something stir, like the first green shoot pushing through snow. Hope. The miracle of winter wasn't just that the storm had passed. It was that, in its wake, love had begun to take root, undeniable and strong. Spring did not arrive in a hurry that year. Winter lingered like an old soldier, reluctant to leave his post, but slowly. Steadily, the snow retreated. Icicles dripped into rivulets, sidewalks cleared, and the once buried town began to breathe again. Life moved forward with it. The storm had left its scars collapsed, barns, broken fences, and roofs that sagged under the weight of snow. But it had also left something far more lasting, a renewed sense of community. Neighbors, who had once nodded politely from a distance, now stopped to share stories, laughter, and gratitude. And through it all, Martin found himself at the center, not because he sought it, but because he had answered when the town needed him. And Claire had been at his side. Rumors still fluttered now and then, as rumors always do. But the narrative had shifted. People no longer saw her as the untouchable CEO hiding from scandal. They saw her as a woman who had shoveled snow, carried firewood, and warmed hearts. Respect had replaced suspicion. One evening, the town gathered at the community hall to celebrate the end of the long winter. Strings of lights hung across the rafters, casting a golden glow on the wooden floor. Tables groaned under the weight of casseroles and pies, dishes each family had contributed. Children chased each other between chairs, their laughter ringing through the hall. Martin stood near the back, Lily perched on his hip. She had insisted on wearing her best dress, a blue one with tiny white flowers, and she twirled happily whenever someone complimented her. He smiled, pride radiating from him. For all the battles he had fought, raising her was the one that mattered most. Claire appeared beside him, dressed simply but elegantly, her hair loose around her shoulders. She greeted the townsfolk with warmth, shaking hands, sharing hugs, listening to their stories. Watching her, Martin realized just how seamlessly she had become part of this place, part of his life. The band struck up a tune, cheerful and bright. Couples began to drift toward the dance floor. Martin felt a pang in his chest, a memory of that first dance in the ballroom when Claire had whispered, "Pretend you're with me." That night had felt like a dream, fragile and fleeting. But tonight was different. Claire turned to him, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Well, soldier, care to dance?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "You remember how awkward I was last time?" "I remember," she said softly, "that you carried yourself with more grace than you realize." Before he could answer, Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, you have to. Please dance with her." Her plea was so earnest, her smile so hopeful, that Martin couldn't refuse. With a mock sigh, he set her down and took Claire's hand. The crowd seemed to hush as they stepped onto the floor, not because they were unexpected partners this time, but because the sight of them together had become something the town quietly cherished. The music slowed the fiddle, giving way to a gentle guitar. Martin placed his hand on Claire's waist, feeling her steady warmth, and she slipped her fingers into his. This time, he didn't stumble. This time, he wasn't pretending. They moved slowly across the floor, the world narrowing to just the two of them. Claire's smile was unguarded radiant. Martin felt a weight lift from his shoulders, the weight of years spent believing his story was finished. In her eyes, he saw the truth: he was not done living, not done loving. The song swelled, and applause rose around them, but it was Lily's laughter that filled Martin's heart. She clapped along to the beat, her teddy bear tucked under her arm, her eyes shining with delight. For her, this was not just a dance. It was proof that her father was whole again. As the music ended, Claire leaned close, her breath warm against his ear. This isn't pretend anymore. Martin's chest tightened, but this time it wasn't fear, it was release. No, he said softly. It never was. The crowd cheered, and Lily ran into their arms, hugging them both. For the first time in years, Martin felt surrounded not by loss, but by love. The empty chair that had haunted him at every gathering was gone, replaced by something fuller, richer, alive. Later that night, as they walked home under the stars, Martin carried Lily on his shoulders, while Claire walked beside him. The snow crunched beneath their boots, the air crisp and clean. Lily's voice drifted down sleepily. "Daddy, I think Mommy's happy." Martin's throat tightened, but he smiled. "I think so too." Bug. Claire slipped her arm through his, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. They walked in silence, but it was a silence full of peace. The house came into view, its porch light glowing softly in the darkness, no longer just a shelter, but a home reborn. As they stepped inside, Martin realized Sarah's letter had been right. Love was not a single chapter. It was a story that kept being written. Tonight, in the laughter of his daughter and the warmth of Claire's hand in his, a new chapter had begun. And for the first time in a long time, he was not afraid to turn the page. Sometimes life takes everything from us, people we love, dreams we once held the very sense of belonging. Martin thought his story was over. He believed he had to carry grief alone. But kindness has a way of breaking through even the fiercest storms. One whispered invitation, one child's smile, one simple act of standing beside another, these became the miracles that turned an empty chair into a second dance. And so the message lingers long after the music fades. It is never too late to love, to heal, and to begin again. No matter the season, no matter the losses we've endured, there is always another page waiting to be written, one filled with kindness, hope, and the courage to open our hearts once more.